Welcome back to the show. Conversation continues, and we get into some college basketball because we've got our brackets. I'm the guy that waits until the last second to pick my brackets, so I probably won't do mine until like Wednesday night, something like that. Bill Bender's probably already got his done. The Sporting News, he does a great job, joins us here on the show. Sam, when do you fill out your bracket?
Already done a couple of them.
Wow. Bill?
I like you, will fill them out. I'll do 3 or 4, but I fill them out Wednesday night. And I was the guy who had the roommate in college who was the Templar Knight of brackets. It was only fill out one, and there's no reason to fill out another one. And he would make fun of me, and I'd be like, well, your bracket can end by 2:00, man. And we would always go back and forth about him. I had a great roommate, love him, but he still to this day is a one bracket guy, and that's it.
All right, fair enough. This portion of the show is presented by our friends at Colossus Fantasy. Peer-to-peer contests, cash out live on Colossus Fantasy. Pick'em games, it's fantastic. Go and use my promo code for your first deposit. SportsWrap, you get $10 deposit gets you $50, $20 deposit gets you $100. Check it out over on Colossus Fantasy. All right, guys, let's get into it. Give me some thoughts here on what surprised you most in the bracket. I was texting you over the weekend when St. John's got the win over UConn. I thought they could be as high as a 3 seed. You thought 4 seed. I don't know how they get a 5 seed. That was one of the things that stuck out to me. We'll get to that, and then Miami of Ohio. Tell me what you thought about St. John's first.
So when we were texting back and forth where I struggled on my bracketology over the weekend, and I did, for the first time, I think, at Sporting News, get all 68 teams right, but I'm not going to pat myself on the back because the bubble was so bad that it was pretty clear who those 68 teams were going to be. Where I struggled the most was between the 4 and 5 line, so I had St. John's as a 4, stunned that they got a 5. I don't like the treatment. I mean, they did sweep the Big East regular season and tournament championship. That, to me, we were talking about a 3, Jason, and I would have said that's fine too. A little bit of a disconnect with where they should be and where they are. The funny part about this is watch how many people pick St. John's to beat Duke. And then you're going to tell me they should have been a 5 seed. Not only are you going to pick them to beat the 4 in Kansas, you're going to pick them to beat Duke. And that's where I think the biggest disconnect as far as those top 5 lines was. And I also a little bit surprised that Vanderbilt dropped from a 4 to a 5. I thought they were a pretty solid 4.
Yeah, that region, by the way, the St. John's, UConn, that region is just hell. Sam, you had a follow-up. Go ahead.
Yeah, Bill, you kind of touched on it there, but the way that this bracket has been set up, we're poised for a second-round matchup between St. John's and Kansas. Now, I know there are a ton of people talking about Northern Iowa and how you can't look past Northern Iowa in the first round if you're St. John's, but assuming we get there to that second-round game between St. John's and Kansas, what sort of implications do you think that game has, not only between the Patino and Self matchup within that game, but also you've got, Darren Peterson versus Zuby Ejiofor, 2 guys who are going to go in the first round of this year's NBA draft. What would the implications be if St. John's met Kansas? Well,
Darren Peterson has a lot on the line this weekend. I think perhaps more than any other freshman because, you're going up against Cal Baptist and they can play a little bit. Like you said, you don't want to look past these first round matchups like Northern Iowa. I mean, they do lead the nation in scoring defense. So they got to play. But if we get that matchup, it's not just about the coaches. I think it's mostly about Darren Peterson. Can he take this Kansas team to the Sweet 16? Because regardless of what happens to the Jayhawks, he's the guy that we're going to either blame or praise for this first weekend. So I think perhaps no player has more on the line than him. And you guys touched on it, Duke. Hey, come on down. What do you get for getting the number 1 overall seed? You get Tom Izzo. You get Dan Hurley. You get 4 national championship coaches in your bracket. It's absurd how much blue blood is in that bracket.
All right, give me your thoughts on Miami of Ohio. Obviously, not just getting in, but getting the seeding they did. 2 teams out of the MAC. Go.
It's ridiculous that they have to play a first 4 game, in my opinion. The reward for going 31-0, and it's again a disconnect between we we rely so much on quadrants and net ranking and quad 3 losses and those kind of things that you kind of lose sight of. This team went 31-0. I thought they should have been a number 10 seed. I really like Akron too, by the way. They had a great finish to win the MAC championship. I got them as, I think they're going to win as a 12 seed in the first round against Texas Tech if they shoot the ball well. But yeah, I think Miami should have been a 10. I think St. Louis got a little bit of seed disrespect as well. I mean, did you watch the end of that sequence against Dayton? I mean, are we going to penalize them for that shot-making sequence between those two programs? It was incredible.
Bill, as we look towards the first four, because I always think that these are 4 great games that people continue to underrate year in and year out.
Yeah.
But obviously, we've touched a little bit on the Miami of Ohio SMU game. Of the other 3, is there any one that particularly excites you?
I mean, believe it or not, I'm looking forward to Texas NC State, and both teams are not playing well. But on one hand, you have an NC State team that shoots the 3 very well. Will Wade's back in the tournament. And Texas with Sean Miller. I almost slipped my mind. I was like, oh, yeah, he coaches there. Terrible finish to the season for the Longhorns, but they're in. That's one of those just feels like it's a pick 'em for a reason because it's probably going to be a wildly entertaining first 4 games. So I'll definitely settle in and watch that one as well. Dalen Swain, go back to last year, he had 27 points for Xavier in the first round, so he could have a big game there.
Where do you every year we look for these Cinderellas, and I know a lot of people have kind of gone on the theme that there's going to be less and less Cinderellas. Where do you fall in that conversation?
Well, my editor just texted me an article about it. The death of Cinderella, is it NIL induced? Probably a little. I mean, last year you had John Calipari and a 10 seed dressed up as a Cinderella. That was the only double-digit seed that got to the second weekend. So I still think there's a little room for madness. I always keep an eye on the bracket buster type schools that have a bunch of seniors, that have played with the program. Now, a team like High Point that won 30 games, they have a bunch of transfers. So they're a team that I'm keeping an eye on in that game against Wisconsin because anytime you win 30 games, you're doing something right no matter what conference you're in. So keep an eye on the Panthers there. Problem is they're playing a Wisconsin team that isn't afraid to get out and go, too, and shoot a bunch of threes.
All right, we got more to discuss with our friend Bill Bender, the Sporting News, college basketball. The NCAA tournament is here. Get your brackets filled out. We'll have predictions later in the week, but we'll get some of Bill's predictions as we continue on this Monday edition of Sports Wrap. Don't go anywhere. Lots more to do. Continuing the conversation with Bill Bender from the Sporting News, does a great job on all things college sports, college football, college basketball, NCAA tournament. Field of 68 is set. What else jumped out at you, Mr. Bender, from what we saw? Good, bad, or ugly?
So the Michigan region has 6 teams that were in the top 10 in scoring this season. So you're going to have some fun games there. St. Louis, Georgia. We talked about Alabama playing Hofstra. Potential Sweet 16 matchup between Alabama and Michigan would be a lot of fun. Some questions around the Wolverines, but I have less. I don't think they lost yesterday because LJ Casson's out. I mean, they've won 4 games without him against tournament teams. I think they got pounded inside a little bit. And that would be my concern with them, that they have to defend. And when they have to defend against the team that can shoot from 3-point and score inside, like Alabama, it could translate into a really fun game. So I think that region in particular is going to have some really fun matchups with some high-scoring games where you can take the over.
Bill, looking at the Big Ten and their final in Purdue beating Michigan, what's your concern level with Michigan entering the tournament right now? Do they seem more liable to be upset early because of what you saw in that loss to Purdue, or do you think that'll light a fire under them and they are more poised to make a deep run?
Well, every year we do our predictions at Sporting News, and I picked them to win the whole thing. So I think I'm not as worried as, say, some of our other experts. Mike DeCourcy picked Arizona, and that's a perfectly good pick. I always make the joke that I've been doing those predictions for us at Sporting News since 2017, and I think I've got the title game winner right one time. It was UConn in a year where you couldn't miss by taking UConn. But I like their team. I still think they can score. I think Morrow will be a huge player in the tournament for them. He's the key center. They need Elliot Cadeau to stay out of foul trouble because Kayson's out. And Yaxel Lindeborg obviously can make the big shot. So I'm not as worried about them as maybe some others. And I do think if the Big Ten's going to break this 26-year drought, this is the team to do it.
Is North Carolina susceptible to you with the Caleb Wilson injury and sort of, given what's befallen them here?
Yeah, because VCU is really good, and they've only lost one game since like January 17th, and they were kind of another school that unfairly treated, like they had to win the A-10 to get in. This is a really dangerous team, VCU, not just in that game, but maybe to make the Sweet 16.
Wow.
Of those double-digit seeds, I like VCU a lot. And then on the other side, but they have to beat North Carolina. That's the catch. And then the other one I like a lot, but they've got to go out and beat Kentucky is Santa Clara. I think when you look at their makeup and the way they play around Herb Sendek, they've got a team that could pull an upset there out of the West Coast Conference. But you're picking against Kentucky and North Carolina. That's always risky.
It's a Kentucky team that's lost a couple of bad games this year, though. Bill, one of the biggest discussions, or maybe one of the most controversially discussed things I saw among college basketball fans over the weekend was all of these schools that kind of fell off of the bubble through their conference tournaments or what have you, announcing that they weren't going to partake in the NIT. They were opting out of the NIT despite the fact that they weren't going to make the NCAA Division I men's tournament. What do you think has caused all of these larger schools to kind of push away the secondary tournaments that we're so used to seeing them compete in, the NIT, the CBI, which I think has now become something completely different? But how do you feel about all of these schools kind of declining their invitations to go play in other tournaments?
Well, it feels like bowl games, doesn't it? Where, these teams opt out of bowl games because the coach leaves or they're disappointed or those kind of things. And, with all this talk about the tournament expanding to 76 teams, that's only going to get worse. But I'm more of a proponent of let's keep it at 68. The NIT is still fun. I still enjoy watching it, especially when it has 32 teams. It's good for teams that want to make that building block to the next year, or the snubs from the mid-majors. So, hopefully that doesn't become a trend.
Give me a thought on UConn. The bad losses to Creighton and Marquette, the 2 losses to St. John's, and a loss to Arizona. I mean, that's what you have when you look at this UConn season. Give me a thought here on Dan Hurley's team and sort of, again, that brutal region they're in and where you see them going here.
They got to defend. They do defend well, and that could get them in the tournament. I mean, a potential for a UConn-Michigan State game will be every question you want to ask about Hurley, you could ask about Tom Izzo. Is this team good enough to make an Elite Eight run? Can they get to the Final Four with the style that they play? I think the guards would be key there. UConn needs to shoot the ball a little bit better and defend a little bit better. And if they can do that, set up that matchup with the Spartans, if the Spartans get through, and like what you said, it's just a ridiculous region with so much blue blood in it that we've lost count.
Bill, with the last minute we have, a team that I just keep drawing my eye back to is the Arkansas Razorbacks and John Calipari. Do you give them any sort of a shot coming off of this Cinderella, well, I don't want to call it a Cinderella run, but this run that they just made to the SEC championship, do you give them a shot to be sort of an underlooked team or an overlooked team that makes it to the Final Four this year?
Well, a potential second-round matchup against Wisconsin could be high-level entertainment. I mean, Darius Acuff is one of the best players in this tournament. Again, another freshman with so much to prove, and he's carried this team. And I know Cal had some bad first-round losses at Kentucky, but when you get him in the tournament, he can coach. And it's the same way I feel about Pitino, is like, if I'm a coach of another team, those are the 2 coaches I don't want to play against, especially if you give them a little bit of an underdog card. That's very dangerous. But yeah, Arkansas playing very well. Look for that to continue this week.
We only got about 20 seconds here. Were you surprised Penny Hardaway kept his job at Memphis?
A little bit, but I mean, there's work to do there. He's taken them to the tournament. That's a tough job, a tough undertaking, and but not surprised he's kept the job. No.
Okay. Bill Bender does a great job with the Sporting News. Who's your Final Four?
Michigan, Duke, Arizona, and Illinois. Illinois goes off the chalk. Watch out for the Illini. I think they play well.
There you go. Bill Bender of the Sporting News. Check out his work there. Appreciate you, my friend.
Hey, thank you.
¿Quieres mejor internet? Cox Internet de 300 megas tiene las velocidades rápidas y confiables que buscas. Perfecto para streaming y gaming y trabajar desde casa. Todo por solo $45 al mes cuando agregas Cox Mobile. Incluye equipo de Wi-Fi y garantía de precio de 2 años en tu plan. No esperes. Cámbiate hoy a Cox. Requiere Cox Mobile Gig Unlimited. Garantía de precio no incluye impuestos y cargos. Velocidad de datos móviles se reduce después de 20 gigas al mes.